Evening, friends. Welcome tonight to the new podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. Topics will include sexual abuse, religious abuse, church division, and addictions of all type. We offer live counseling sessions and a continuum with meaningful question and answer discussions. Our main focus is to promote three things: forgiveness, healing, and getting back together, reconciling differences. That's our main focus: reconciliation, forgiveness, and healing. The team includes Alita Williams, Personnel Director, Linda Holmes, our LPN, Ms. Tennille, Technical Director, and my name is Prince, Licensed Counselor, founder of Antioch Youth Center, retired. The views and opinions of our program, the podcast, Wounded Hearts, are from our guests and may not necessarily reflect our traditions, ideas, or mores. Be advised, topics may contain sensitive information, so we ask that you listen with discretion. Tonight, we have two very special guests. First, we have Pastor Rood, Fifth Generation Church of God pastor, and also our listening audience. If you wish to chime in on our chat, feel free. We do invite that. You can go to YouTube, Church of God in Macon, Georgia, and you'll see the live division where you can click on there. Discussion tonight will be recovery from division. It's an issue around Church of God, unfortunately. So we want to do what we can to put a stop to it and to, again, promote those three things: forgiveness, healing, reconciliation, to see a blessing come out of all that has occurred those past about 90 years. Pastor Rood, some viewers may want to have off-topic questions. Where do you hold services? How can they connect with you, etc.?
Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this. I've watched some of your previous podcasts, and I really can see how that you're doing a great ministry, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am, at this time, the best way to contact me is at my email, and that would be backtothebible@aol.com, and that 2 is the number 2. So backtothebible@aol.com.
Pastor Rood, what discussions are you working with on your platform with your studies there?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I'm not really, I don't normally call myself pastor. I'm actually an elder in the church here. Okay. And so we do have a number of pastors, including myself, but we are in more of a shared leadership environment. So that's not really a title that I use. I appreciate you using the offer, and I understand what you mean by it. But I'm really just an elder here. I retired from government service 2018, and you know how it is. I always had a lot of research topics that I wanted to do. Some of them I got done, and some of them I did not. And so I've been working on a number of different research topics related to the Church of God. And so I put together PowerPoint presentations, and also doing some writing. So there's various topics. When I was in high school, I was not into history at all, but over the years I've developed a love for history, particularly church history. And so now that I'm retired, I have a little extra time, not a whole lot of time, but I do have a little extra time to do some research, and so that's what I've been doing.
Elder Rood, we want to get on point here, and again, we're discussing people with wounds in the church, how they occur, and we're finding out that it's important how issues are handled. I'm quoting now from Wesley's book on perfection, the 1921 edition, page 237, and he quotes, 2 or 3 began imaginations as impressions from God. They supposed that they could not be tempted, not experience pain, and they could discern spirits. Wesley returned a month later, and he's quoting, the hand of the Lord was not stayed. More and more sinners were converted. what I learned from that, when issues occur, how we handle them is very important. Also, too, the Lutheran study 2 years ago, 700 churches were affected with splits or left their synod, and they've begun a new denomination called Lutheran Congregation Mission to Christ. The Presbyterians in 2012, the stats indicate clearly 100 churches left within 1 year. So to our questions with Elder Rood, how important is unity in the Church of God?
Well, I think unity is just a foundational teaching. It's something that should be natural. When we read in Scripture, we read about one body, and the church is to operate as one body. And when the body is severed up, divided up, she cannot operate the way that God has intended her to do. So it's really a foundational teaching. I brought a copy here of this chart I did many years ago, and I just hold that up here to the camera. You've probably seen that chart. I'm sure you have. I did this back in 2003, and I did this on a Saturday. And we've talked before, I have a pretty extensive library, so I'm able to go down and get some information relatively quickly. And my goal was to, in putting that chart together, was to talk about how some of the pioneer members of the Church of God, how they taught unity. And so I wanted to have something to kind of catch people's attention as to where we were at that time. And hopefully that would spark interest in them wanting to see some reconciliation take place. Because I think that unity is absolutely foundational. We hear a lot about it in our messages, but we don't see it practiced probably as much as we should.
That's my next question. How does it occur? How can we begin that in the individual? How does that start?
Well, I think it starts through a born again experience. When you're born into the family of God, there's something that supernaturally takes place and causes you to want to be with your brothers and sisters. It's just like as natural as breathing. It's not something you have to even give a whole lot of thought to. And so that spiritual connection that we get with our brothers and sisters, it's not just for our own benefit, but for their benefit as well. And for the benefit of the world. When the world can see the church working together, hand in hand, and being, effective, it sends a message to them like nothing else will. And it causes them to believe the gospel.
If a person isn't sanctified, could they be led astray in division, do you think?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No doubt about it. There's a lot of people that are saved and sanctified that's involved in division, and some of them have even created division. So it's not something that's we like to talk about, but it is a reality. So I don't think that just because we had an experience or two experiences, 20, 30 years ago, that doesn't protect us today from going into error. We have to constantly be on guard.
Elder Rood, that's true. We've got to be on guard because it's so common, unfortunately. And with your help, with our team's help, we're trying to get away from that picture to instill unity, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Any questions from the director?
Not from the chat, but I did have a question for Brother Rood, if he didn't mind. In our past sessions, we've had some pastors that have given their own personal experiences with division, and some of the main causes were pride. In your experience and in your history and in your research, what would you say is the defining root to these causes for division?
That's a great question. I haven't been involved personally in a lot of church division. I'm thankful for that. I've attended two congregations my whole life. And so I don't have a lot of personal experience related to division, but certainly in putting this chart together, and I have, because I have a large library and have an interest in Church of God history, I know a lot of people in the Church of God. And so I'm aware very much of the divisions that have taken place. And most of them, as I put on that chart there, I kind of tried to capture what the basic reasons for those divisions that took place individually. Some of them are doctrinal differences. Maybe someone feels that they've received new understanding in some way. And Church of God people and holiness people in general, we're not quick to accept change. That's for sure. We like to consider things and make sure it's right. And so there's doctrinal reasons for people that have split up. I think by far, a lot of the recent stuff that's happened has been more personality related, unfortunately. Two preachers will get into a spat about something. Someone said somebody or somebody did something, and they'll go get their friends. And then next thing you know, it's created a division within the body. And that's really unfortunate. I can understand why when doctrinal differences take place, I can understand how there would be questions and examinations and maybe some time involved in trying to sort things through. But when it gets down to the personal level, it can get really bad, and then people start taking sides, and next thing you know, you've got a full-blown split. So that would be my input to your question.
In dealing with personalities, how should that have been handled? What would be your advice to be if you got a very flamboyant guy here, a quiet guy there? What would be your advice on how to work that out as far as the personalities?
Well, I tell you, and this is just my observation, and I'm glad that you said up front that, the views of of the guests don't necessarily reflect everybody's views. And so I'm just going to share you my understanding, okay?
Okay.
But I don't think that we've ever figured out how to work Matthew 18 correctly. When there's issues between brethren, I don't think we've worked that out. We've done a good job of trying to resolve problems. And the Church of God doesn't seem to understand how to resolve conflict in a reasonable way. And so a lot of times when there's conflict either between saints or between ministers, they'll go off and pick sides and so forth. But I think the solution to that is to follow Matthew 18, 15 through 17, I believe it is, where if I have an issue with somebody, then I should prayerfully take that issue to that person and try to resolve it at the lowest level.
Right.
I worked in the military, and they always tell you, work things at the lowest level. Don't bring stuff to the top unless it can't be resolved. And so they always admonish us, but that's a biblical principle. And so we try to work things out prayerfully between two individuals. If that doesn't work, then we take it before a couple other witnesses. And the reason why we do that is because the more people we get involved, hopefully they've got some gift of discernment, some wisdom of ways to try to get things resolved. Not to get the news out there or try to make more problems or get people to take sides, but take it to unbiased individuals that can hopefully help us work through those problems and identify, where there may be error. If that doesn't work, and God forbid that doesn't work, but if it doesn't work, then we take it to the highest authority on earth. And we don't realize that the highest authority on earth is the church. It's not the leadership. I'm a leader. I don't have any more authority than anybody else does when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we take it to the church. The church listens. And at that point, you should have all the gifts of the Spirit working so that it should be resolved in a peaceful way. If it's not, then the church makes that determination. And unfortunately, if it doesn't get resolved, then, the outcome is not always real favorable. But I can say that in my experience, I'm 59 years old. I don't know that I've ever seen that work personally. I've talked to a lot of other people, and I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that they've been through that specific process in trying to resolve issues between the individuals. Typically, what happens if a church member has a difference with somebody else, they take it to the pastor or to the leader and then expect him or her to go resolve it. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And so I don't think we have that process. I don't think it's working the way that it should work. And that's just my viewpoint. That's how I see it.
Is it possible to have a church split without leaving the congregation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I mean, church splits, they usually split physically long after they split internally, because people will take up sides and, this one's for this cause or this one's for that person. And then you get little groups within the church, and the church, even though they're meeting together, they're not united. It's kind of like buying a puzzle. All the pieces are in the box, but you can't tell what the picture is because they're not together. And so it takes really a desire to be united, to just as you put a puzzle together. It really takes a desire to be united, or otherwise the natural tendency is to split, and that is a tragedy.
I really enjoyed what your diagram there. Did any of those groups get back together after so many years from the diagram you wrote?
Yes, they did. I'm not because of the diagram, that's for sure, but there are reports of some of the groups that have reconciled, and I love to hear stories like that. And so, I had one minister, when he saw the chart, I think he took offense to the fact that I put that together.
Right.
And he was kind of shooting the messenger instead of trying to see what the message was, and I didn't create that mess. I was just trying to use it as an example of how we need to work together. And so eventually some of these groups have reconciled, but sadly, since I did that chart back in 2003, there's been a lot more splits have taken place. And you probably couldn't even fit it on one page now.
Wow.
I think typically what happens is, I ran some statistics on that one time, and every little branch typically has a split about every 10 years on average. And that's sad. We just said our fundamental message is unity, but we've not really practiced it too well, and in too many cases.
Elder, let's widen our scope. Wounds that affect church people generally. If a person's been wounded, and I'm sure we have some out there who have been wounded, what would you tell them? If they wounded in the church, something said, something happened, something occurred, what would be your advice to them, how to get help from that wound?
Okay. Well, first of all, where you have people, you're going to have problems. And that's just the way it is. And so there are times when we're all going to have our feelings hurt. We might have things that happen where people might say things that they don't really realize that they're offending. And so my first piece of advice is give someone the benefit of the doubt.
True.
And if you were really hurt, then do what Matthew says and go talk to that person individually and explain to them, hey, I don't know if you meant anything when you said this, but this is how I took it. Did I take it wrong? Or is there something I can do to help out here to resolve this? And so I would, first of all, give people the benefit of the doubt. And then secondly, if we have the Spirit of God, then we should have the fruit of the Spirit. And so we should treat everybody in every situation, exercise those fruit. And if you think about what those are, peace, joy, forbearance, kindness, just a little kindness, kill them with kindness if necessary,
yes.
Be good, faithful, be gentle, self-control, and it's not one mentioned in that particular passage, but forgiveness. I think really if we have the fruit of the Spirit, those things should be prominent in our lives. And what's it say? Love will cover a multitude of sins.
Right.
And so I do believe in that. So that's basically, that would be my advice. And the other thing is, we had a brother that was in our congregation. He was a very wise man, and he would often say, hurting people hurt other people. And so sometimes people hurt other folks because they're hurt. And if you can help them resolve their hurts, then maybe they won't hurt other people. And so a ministry such as you've got going on here, can have tentacles out into a very broad area by just helping these people that might be hurt. So anyways, that would be my advice.
Yes, ma'am. Director, please, you have some questions?
Elder Rood, going back to what you said earlier about taking your grievances to the church, I had a question from the chat in reference to that. And Ms. Diaz said, when you say take it to the church, should you stand up in front of the whole church and air your grievances?
No, I don't think it works that way. What I would recommend, as I understand the process, you go to the individual. And if it gets resolved, that's the end of it. Okay. And then if it doesn't get resolved, you bring in some other individuals, unbiased. They could be elders or they could just be spiritual saints. Hopefully they got some discernment, some wisdom, and then they listen and they're trying to help resolve it. If it doesn't get resolved, then the 4 of you or the 5 of you bring it to the church. So it's not you that maybe has the offense or the offense has happened to are bringing it to the church, but you're bringing it collectively. And why are you doing it? You're bringing it in a spirit of humility and meekness and kindness and love because you wanted to get it worked out. So, yeah, I don't see it as I wouldn't stand up and say, well, I'm going to call a meeting and, we're going to talk about no. It has to be a joint collective. And if the attitude's not right, it's doomed to fail.
No,
please go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I had a personal question in reference to that. If in following these steps, Elder Rood, how, as a pastor, and you're observing these instances, these groups, how do you handle that as an elder or as a pastor? How do you handle those type of challenges or situations in your position?
You mean groups as in different Church of God groups?
No, within the congregation itself, within that particular congregation, you as a man of God and with the spirit of discernment, you notice these divisions, these dividing groups. How do you handle it? Where do you go from there with that?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And I'm going to take the liberty to say again that this is my viewpoint and my understanding of things. So I'm in an environment now where we have shared leadership. So we don't just have one single pastor, we have several individuals that have the gift of pastoring. And so we love each other and we love the saints and we're servants. We don't see ourselves as rulers or dictators or anything like that. And so if we see something that's happening among the saints, we're not, first of all, I'll tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to preach at people. We're not going to get up there in pulpit and send subliminal messages to people or preach on something that's actively going on. But we're going to meet with the individuals and pray and try to get it resolved and try to basically encourage them to work through this process in Matthew. So yes, there may be some issues that might be due to a lack of understanding of scripture or specific teaching. And so we might be able to cover some of those areas collectively. But otherwise, yeah, the goal should always be for reconciliation and resolution of the issue. And I tell you what, I work with some wonderful saints. We've been working in the eldership model for about 15 years now. And we have never had one single problem that came up that caused hard feelings or hurt feelings or anything like that, because we're bound together in love, and we're just not, we're and I hesitate to say this because we're on a public environment, but I'm really as close to some of these saints as I am my own physical family. And that's not a bad reflection on my family. I have a wonderful family. I love my brothers and my sisters and all my cousins and everybody else. But the saints, there's a special bond there. And so you just don't like to see people hurt or things go unresolved. It just feels like it just doesn't feel right. So you do everything that you can in a peaceful way and in a spirit of humility. Scripture talks about if you see a brother overtaken in a fault, how are you to approach that person? You're to approach them, first of all, in a spirit of meekness and humility, because it could be you.
True.
It could be you. And when you approach it that way, then something happens inside where you become sympathetic to the point that it almost like this has to get resolved. We don't want to see nobody hurt,
Very true, yeah.
So I think it all really comes down to loving each other, and trying to look out for everybody's interest. And I'm sorry if that was a long answer to your question. It may not even been an answer, but
very good.
Elder, our time is gone. I've got questions still here, so I've got to bring you back. That's my excuse to get you back. Perfect timing. To our staff, thank you so much. To our viewers, thank you so much. Elder, I'll call you again to finish up our question list. This is Wounded Hearts, Thursday at 7 o'clock. May the Lord bless you.
Thank you.